Hello, and welcome to Arts and Entertainment.
With Chris and Randall.
I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
And welcome to our show. If you're new to the show or you are a longtime viewer or listener, you know I cannot start the show without saying please like and subscribe to our show on whatever platform you are listening to the show on. Because we need your feedback. We want to know what you think, and the kind of things that you like, we will do more of, and the kind of things you don't like, we will do more of, because we want to get a conversation going, and we are just going to try to figure out how that's going to work out. But today's episode is a very interesting one because it was kind of put together at the last minute, but it is on improv, as it appears on TV shows, predominantly what we'll call a situation comedy or a one-camera comedy, or whatever the Emmys would nominate for best comedy, because the standard of what a comedy is ever evolving. And we're going to talk about improv, which is an acting technique that is improvisational. So instead of, say, scripted works, we're talking about how improv works. And Randall, what, I guess really the most basic, how would you basically describe improv for just so we can get that done?
Improv, I think, was invented by Viola Spolin, right, in the 60s, I want to say, or maybe the 50s. And
somewhere around there.
She just invented it as a way to entertain children who are interested in the theater, but these are just little kids that she wanted to get them on stage, but she wanted to go through the laborious task of having them memorize things. So she invented these games to so that they could just make up their lines, right? And
absolutely, I actually have a copy, and it's very funny when you read it. It reads like a teacher's manual for teaching small children.
Right.
It does not read like an actor's guide to acting.
Right. So she's just an acting teacher trying to teach kids and make it fun and play games. And I don't know how it happened, but these games took off, and like they kind of changed the acting world, right? I mean, they invented all these adult actors. It was mostly college kids at first, right? They started their own improv theaters.
The University of Chicago had the Compass Players in the 1950s, and people like the man and woman who would make movies. I'm sorry,
Mike Nichols
and Elaine May and Alan Arkin, and I believe even Ed Asner. They all came out of the Compass Players. And then from the Compass Players, you have Second City, which comes out of Chicago. And then somewhere along the line, you have Del Close. You're helpful on this one.
Yeah, well.
Where you went from theater games now to long-form improv.
Yeah. So they started as theater games for children. And most people just, the early adult adopters were like college kids that were just having fun, basically, right? They made these theaters, and people came and saw shows. I mean, Chicago is the ground zero of improv was Chicago. And Chicago, I don't know if you've ever been there, but Chicago's a big theater.
Many times. I went to college in the Midwest.
Oh, well, exactly. Well, I was sort of talking to the audience, but I know that Chris here has been to Chicago.
Sorry, audience. I thought Randall was talking to me. Go on, audience. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, Chris, no.
Never want to interrupt in an improv, by the way. Improv has rules.
Well, God, where was I? Chicago's a big theater town. So people love the theater in Chicago. Like, if you ever go there, you'll see there's theaters everywhere. They're packed. People love them. I mean, it's unlike, I think it's even unlike New York in that respect. I mean,
well, New York City has the largest collection of legitimate theaters, and Chicago has the largest collection of regional theaters and amateur theaters. So Chicago is a great place to go and hone your craft, or to start a theater. Steppenwolf, a lot of great, the Goodman Theater. There's a lot of great theater that comes out of it, which is why Second City is, I guess, it's the first real improv school that we know of after the Compass Players.
Right. Well, wouldn't you say Chicago is like a great place for experimentation in theater? I mean, that's
Oh yeah, and look,
why improv came
I
out of
got
there.
I got a lot of friends in Chicago, and maybe one of them is actually listening. So I love Chicago. Yes, and Chicago. I mean, I remember when I was in college. It was actually the first time I ever saw the Second City. It was a regional company. They came, even though I was taking theater at that time. I was taking playwriting and not so much acting. I knew a little bit about improv from an acting perspective, but the first time I ever saw like actual, improv where they take suggestions from the audience, where they play different games, where they then do a longer form version, where they do sketches that were kind of based on improv games. I found it to be a very mind-opening experience because it's so spontaneous. I would say that is probably the most distinctive aspect of improv versus scripted entertainment is it's so spontaneous. It comes out of someone's mouth, and sometimes it's amazing and sometimes it's terrible. And I believe every school that teaches improv, we should get to our own training in a moment. Basically, you commit to the choice.
Right. Well, I want to add that one of the things those early college kids having fun with improv like to do is they were trying to capture the zeitgeist of the time. We're talking about the 60s.
Yeah.
We're talking about a lot of stuff going on in civilization and American society. And the idea was, they just get on stage and they just make stuff up on the stage, right? I think a lot of them, I read and saw documentaries where some of those early people talk about how they would read the newspaper for inspiration, right? They would look to current events for inspiration. And that helped them.
That exactly what's going on in the world. Mort Sahl, who's a comic, was doing that too. So you even have improv bleeding into just avant-garde stand-up.
Right. And Chicago is a great place for this because audiences really show up there. I mean, Chicago is one of the greatest theater towns I think ever. I mean, maybe even better than New York. I don't know. But yeah, audiences just show up, and they show up to small theaters. They show up to experimental theaters. I mean, it's amazing. But I guess we're going to get to Del Close. I mean, so in the early days, I think most of the people doing improv, like I was saying, they were just like 20-year-old kids in college, having fun, And Del Close is one of the early people that thought improv is its own art form. and improv should be taken seriously as an art form, like any other art form. And I think that's a division. That's like a conflict in improv that you see even to this day. There are those who want to look at improv and say, oh yeah, improv is a very serious art form and we should take it seriously. And then the other side, which says, no, improv's just fun and it's for playing games and we should play improv games. And
Del Close is kind of like Aristotle's Poetics, in that you can, if you're looking for rules to an aesthetic art form that are universally recognized but not universally practiced, I would absolutely look to the book Truth in Comedy by Del Close, and also probably Impro by Kenneth Johnston. Though Kenneth Johnston is more of an acting teacher, he also talks about certain rules in improv. And I know when most of us start out, we all get a copy of Truth in Comedy by Del Close, and it's great if you can also get Spolin Games and Kenneth Johnston's Impro, because those are at least all the codified rules that the majority of people who practice improv will use, such as yes and. So in improv, you don't normally deny something. You normally, whatever, this pizza made out of tungsten steel is so much better than I expected. And then Randall would yes me.
And I love it too.
And add something else
and
to it.
I made a pizza out of zinc and it was horrible.
Zinc pizza only works with anchovies. And then you build out a scene. You build out a scene. Another rule that you see in improv that is less popular today for some weird-ass reason is that you don't deny. So I made a pizza out of tungsten steel.
No, you didn't. I mean, yes, you did. I loved it.
No,
I had
you
a
did.
bite.
It was no, did it? You're lying. So you don't have that. So one of the things that, I mean, this is very rudimentary, but this is kind of fun, is that no matter how difficult or challenging the improvised line is, the receiver of that information has to treat it as if it was the best idea ever, the best choice ever, and then has to build on top of it. And there's a lot of rules of improv, but I honestly think the most important one in discussing today's show is that you have to acknowledge whatever's there and build on it. Or you just take something in the environment and you find a way of connecting it with something else.
Well, yeah, I guess if we're going to talk about the basics, right, exactly. And you're supposed to build a character for yourself and perhaps help your scene partner build a character. And then you're supposed to help build a scene off of that character, right? I mean,
and we call building the scene the game. So once you know, like, well, Chris and Randall, that tungsten steel piece, I'm so glad we brought it on the picnic.
Yes, it was a wonderful picnic. I'm glad you planned it.
Well, in this, I know you're my younger brother, but you have other gifts. Your gift is the ability to just constantly recite, Chaucerian poetry at the most random moment.
Yeah, people don't know I'm slow when I recite Chaucerian poetry. That's why I started memorizing it.
That's what makes it so good. So in an improv scene, you have an activity, you have a setting, you have a relationship, and these things, once they're established, a pattern emerges. The pattern becomes the game, and it plays itself out to, I guess, how does it play itself out? To the highest note, you can go back to where you started, you can get out at the highest punchline.
Well, it depends on what kind of form you're using, right? I mean, one of the things Del Close was interested in was making new forms that people could use. And yeah, so some of the forms, you try to have an ending on the form. You try to put a button on it at the end. Sometimes, well, in a lot of improv, like on stage, I think that it's the lighting guy that ends a scene. The performers just keep going until like there's a big laugh, and then the lighting guy's like, "That's good enough." Turns off.
Right. That's a very good point. So, and we're definitely going to do more shows on improv because it's something that Randall and I both have big backgrounds in. We've both performed improv. We've done improv. We've learned from great people. But I just wanted to get a little bit on improv because we're really going to talk today about, and I'm not using a great word, but the word that I grew up with, the sitcom. And the sitcom, something I have training in as well, and something.
Well, let's talk about your training first before you go into this, Chris. So you had an MFA in the theater.
Playwriting as a master in theater arts with an emphasis on playwriting. I did continued work in television writing at NYU Film School and UCLA Extension. I've studied a lot with a lot of people. I've never sold a script. I keep on submitting.
You took a class at the Groundlings.
Many classes at the Groundlings. I studied with Cynthia Seghetti for 2 years at the Acme Theater. Your background?
I went through all 7 levels at the IO West when it was still existent here in Hollywood.
And they're the ones.
That was Del Close's school.
Del Close's school. You have done improv. You've done sketch.
Yes, I've done sketch comedy, improv. Yes.
So we're both. Hey, audience, we certainly are. This is a topic that we've been holding back on because we know so damn much, and we don't want to just come off like jerks. There's a lot of people in the theater world, acting world, who are well acquainted with improv. I mean, I don't know, what percentage of actors do you think working today have improv experience? I would say it could be the 30% mark, somewhere around there. That is an excellent. That's an excellent point, and certainly why not? Let's just start right there. So, improv in television today, and I don't want to. I'm going to narrow this down because improv is in film, it's in theater, and it is in 1 hour TV. It's even in like evening talk shows and sketch shows. But we just want to keep it on sitcoms just for this one episode. So yeah, what you're noticing in a lot of sitcoms more now than ever is you're noticing a lot of actors who come from places like Second City, the Groundlings, the Acme, people whose background is in improv, and then they're also actors, make no mistake. And one of the greatest misnomers is that improv isn't acting. Improv is a variation of acting. And for people who don't know how to act, and I remember when I started doing improv, I always got notes like, you really need to take more acting classes. So don't think for a second that improv is something that it's, even if people will say they're not actors, no, improv people are.
Can I just interject for a second here, Chris, please?
Please.
Some of the earliest conceptions of improv, especially from Del Close and the Improv is an Art people, is that improv is for everyone. And their idea was anyone from any walk of life should be able to come up and express themselves on stage. But improv today is really turned into really something for actors. I mean, wouldn't you say? I mean,
well, at least to be really clear, I will draw a line between improv that you do live performance, which I do think is for everyone. Improv teams are for everyone. And then improv on a scripted half-hour comedy. And that, because the scripted half-hour comedy just requires certain knowledge of television acting. I'm not saying television acting is hard to master. On camera is something I would argue most people can just take enough workshops and then they'll know how to do this or never to do that. Don't, unless you're on The Office, which we'll get to later.
That was amazing, Chris. That's amazing. I'm in awe of your skills right now.
Right. Well, you know what? Actually, Fudge, I have. Yeah, let's just get into this because this could be like a 3-hour show. I've got so much going on in my mind right now, and I got no sleep. And I did think about the fact that I remember once, the only time I ever went out for a commercial, I had to use improv like the entire time. The entire commercial was just like, okay, Chris. It was for a Boston Market, and I was a guy who was stopping a woman who had just come from the supermarket, and my goal was to convince her that she should go to Boston Market. And the first version of that was like really flirty and seductive. The director's like, just give me the scene, but you're really trying to do. And the other one is like, I want you to do this like a sportscaster. And I and you just come in and like, how does this? You want a roast beef? Now here's a roast beef that'll get so. What was the point of that, man? Oh, well, my point is directors and actors and writers on a show will use improv either with intention or maybe at a table read, an actor will just say, hey, I want to try out this choice. Or the actor will try out the choice. So let's just dive into this because I want to talk about what is the difference, I guess, and I also have a background in scripted writing. What makes improv so special in comedy, especially what makes it so special in popular sitcoms on TV?
Okay. I just want to point out, though, that there are people that advocate like for a dramatic improv, but it never really took off.
You see dramatic improv in acting schools. It's certainly something when you're working on a play you might do just to get the actors more comfortable with the scene. You see it in a lot of films. Ken Loach, Mike Leigh, even Woody Allen do that. And there's dramatic improv even on television.
But improv is known as something that in comedy, isn't it? For whatever reason. I mean, it's more popular in comedy, wouldn't you say?
I think where improv in comedy and drama meet is that the actions and choices somehow come out of the character as it's been established. Once you know in your improv scene who you are, what you want, what your attitude, what your point of view is, and what is your relationship to other people in that environment, you discover other things in the environment and you bring it in. So it's a consciousness that when you're writing a scene, the writer may never have seen. I mean, you guys, you know what it's like when you write something, you have actors do it, and all of a sudden the actor brings something that you just were not aware of because the writer's like a god and you've got that full helicopter vision, whereas the actor is just looking at your character from the ground floor up.
Well, let me just say, the first time you write a script and then you produce it and you see the actors saying your lines, almost everybody has the same experience. Almost every writer has the same experience. They think, wow, this actor's really screwing up my lines.
or the opposite, you feel this wonderful sense of like, you're like, God, like, wow, I put words in other people's mouths, and then you become very protective of what they say. And I know as a playwright, people ask me, well, do you like an actor who just really gets all their lines right or does the character the way you envisioned it? And I said, I like an actor who does the character the way I envisioned it, but I love an actor who not just does it the way I envisioned it, but shows me things in what I wrote that, for better or for worse, I didn't see myself.
Right. I want to say that was my point. I mean, it's a collaborative medium, acting and writing for theater or camera or whatever. Actors are always going to bring something to the character that is of themselves. I mean, there's no way around it. And the writer might have a vision of a character when he or she writes it, but they're never going to foresee what the actor brings. And that's always going to happen, I think.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think what makes television unique is that a TV show, in a movie or a play, it's a limited amount of time. So the writer of a play is normally the author of the play. And even though maybe there's a lot of writers in a movie, they're just telling one story. Whereas a TV show can go on for years. And honestly, the only continuity is really the actor who plays that character. They're the only real continuity. So they're the ones who have to live in that character the most. And they get an intimate understanding of the instincts and point of view to the point where they really just become the expert on that character, and their instincts and their choices come out of it. And then if you're in a really good, Cynthia used to say, you don't wear a character like a coat. You don't just put it on, like you inhabit it. So if you've been inhabiting this character for so many seasons, then you're just going to follow the interior intellectual or emotional or attitudinal logic of that character, and it's going to lead you. And it's interesting. There's a lot of shows and there's a lot about improv, but I really think I just want us to focus on 3 shows that I think make the most interesting use of improv, and they're all shows and they're all shows that either have done well commercially or aesthetically, and they are The Office, the American version, Reno 911, and
Curb Your Enthusiasm?
Thank you very much, Curb Your Enthusiasm. And it's interesting, too, because this is where I'm just want to get to. Reno was on Comedy Central. Mm-hmm. The Office was on NBC, and it was an adaptation of a British show. Curb Your Enthusiasm's always been on HBO. So they're not aesthetically very similar shows. One's a show with 2 are shows with commercials. 2 are on cable. One is an adaptation of a scripted show. There's nothing about these 3 shows on the surface that beyond that would make them very similar. So let's talk about how all 3 use improv and what we like about them. And let's start off with probably one of the best known ones, The Office, the American edition.
Yeah, I guess I could talk about that a little bit. I mean, The Office, I guess, is mostly a scripted show, but the actors, there are definitely actors on that show. I mean, like Steve Carell, who have an extremely long and detailed improv background, right?
I believe literally half the cast of that show were people who came from improv groups, improv teams.
Yes,
like, it's a lot of them.
Yeah, it's an interesting. The Office is an interesting mix of like serious actors and improv actors.
I don't even like the word serious actor. Just actors whose training is not in improv, and actors who will go to improv as their first place.
Yes, and so even though the show's mostly scripted, I think that there's been a lot of lines and jokes over the years, even plot points, right, that have been that came out of some of the improv on set.
Exactly. I mean, there's this scene with actors. It's funny, and that show, his name is Oscar. The actor's name is Oscar. Oscar Nunez is the character, and Michael. And there's an episode where they're teaching tolerance, and there's a title of it. You'd think I would have researched it, but in the script, it just says that Michael hugs Oscar, and that's all it's supposed to be. And I mean, there's things about comedy that's very dated. And one of the things I don't like about a lot of these shows is the homophobia. But it was clearly to show that Michael is comfortable as a straight man hugging a gay man. And it's so in the well-intentioned, horrible nature of Michael Scott that the writers had the right idea. But then Steve Carell and the actor who plays Oscar, named Oscar, I can't remember his last name. They both come from improv, and Carell said, "I think you should kiss him on the lips," and that was something that your partner has to be very comfortable. And improv partners tend to really, if you catch a good improv show, they're okay with their bodies, like any actor. They're not, if they want to go to that sexualized place, they're willing to take it. So then all of a sudden, the entire show changes radically. And now you deal with sexual harassment issues. The character gets a buyout, gets vacation time and money, and all of these things. And the show becomes such a more profoundly dramatic and exciting episode because Carell felt that the real danger point would be in the kiss. And there's a lot of good examples of how improv can make a moment better on a show, but that's a great example of how literally an improvised moment can change the show permanently.
Okay, I just want to add that part of the reason I think that improv can add to a show like The Office is because of new technology. I read an article with about the cinematographer, an interview with the cinematographer of The Office in a cinematography magazine, and so in The Office, they would just run 2 cameras on set all day. They wouldn't even cut. And they would and whenever an actor came up with something, they would just record it. And, even if it wasn't a new line, even if it wasn't an improv, just a new way, a new line delivery, and
it's right.
You couldn't do that you couldn't do that in the old film days. Okay. Because in the old film days, I think a film magazine only went 15 minutes at most, I think. And, film was very expensive, and now with digital video, it's like you can just keep rolling. And all these shows we're talking about, that's what they did. They used the new technology of digital video to just keep rolling all the time and roll hours and hours of footage. And you could have never done that in the olden days.
And that's, I think what's kind of neat about The Office is it's a mockumentary. So sometimes you just have the actors talking to the camera. And sometimes that's scripted, and sometimes they're just letting the actor riff as the character, and even if it doesn't move the story forward, they might just be telling an old story about their family recipe, or they're opining about, growing up on a beet farm and how people survived, or it's just a free form rant that doesn't, and there's a hermetic quality in a scripted show, which is that every line of dialogue moves the story forward. And one of the things that you really see in all 3 of these shows is they violate that rule a lot. that instead of writing stuff that is going to move the story forward, it may or may not, it is really, they're just writing to the punchline or the reveal.
Well, that's the aesthetic of improv, right? Like if you ever go to an improv show and you see it on stage, especially like a long form improv show where they're doing the Harold or some other long form, you'll see that, the show might last an hour or longer, and you'll see that they're just constantly like going on tangents. And they might try by the end to bring together a conclusion of some sort to some of those tangents, but it's mostly just non sequiturs and tangents most of the show, wouldn't you say?
Right, and there's these brilliant moments that come across in the tangent, that come across in that moment, and because it doesn't follow the two key rules of traditional sitcoms, which is it doesn't follow the rule of moving the story forward, and it doesn't follow the rule of punchline setup. Like in a traditional sitcom, I'd be like, hey, the last time we went on a date, you made me pay for dinner. And then you come up with some bullshit line that, well, then might as well keep the tradition. Ha, 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 ha. Right. I improvised that, by the way. But my point is, human beings don't really speak that way. Whereas on The Office, I remember there's this one bit where Ryan starts his own company, an internet company. And I remember one of the characters mentions like, well, he's a narcissistic white boy who never really knows how to work. So I figured he'd be perfect to start a company, but you could see the brain thinking in the how they got to that point. Right. And it sounds much more, I'm not saying it sounds always entirely like how people speak, but at least it sounds like how people think or how people feel. And traditional sitcoms, once you become a full grown-up, really are very hard to watch because of that stagnating feeling that the train is moving forward, or the stagnating feeling that the only reason that actor said what they just said was so that the other actor could give the punchline.
Right, exactly. Well, I remember, I remember years ago I saw, I don't know, I think I had a TV writer come to speak to one of my classes at USC one time, and he talked about how the dialogue on sitcoms is often off script because the actors, and this is most sitcoms, the actors don't have time to memorize the script. Right. So they're just basically going with the idea of their line. And he said that's why the dialogue in a lot of sitcoms is really sounds naturalistic, right? But but you add the ability to have digital video and improv actors that are allowed to do a little bit of improv, and now you've upped that level to like 1,000%. I mean, look at The Office. I mean, people love the way it sounds. The realism of it.
Yeah, and I want to be so clear. It's not like The Office was the first show to use semi-improvisational techniques. It's been around since the 70s. And it's not, what makes The Office so unique was it kind of came to rise just around the same time reality shows started to become popular at the beginning of the 21st century. And it really looked like a reality show, the American version of The Office.
And I want to say one more thing about something you said earlier. I mean, about improv going off on tangents. I mean, the whole point is you are going off on these tangents because it's a process of discovery. You're trying to find truth and beauty and something beautiful, right? You're trying to discover the gold, right? You're trying to discover moments of gold.
You don't know where you're going.
Right.
You're just following a line, but you don't know where you're going. And that's kind of like what, like, I'm not a big fan of football per se. I'm never a fan of any sports, honestly. But a friend of mine once said, the reason why people watch football is on any given Sunday, your team could win. And you don't know. And I think you're right. In improv, you just don't know. And things come out of the blue and things go in different directions. And yeah, it's been on around a lot. But I just felt like The Office is really when, first off, it was a tremendously successful show after the first season. Like a lot of things like Seinfeld, the first season is always rocky. It's on the cusp of cancellation. And then it just does gangbusters. It runs, I think, 8 seasons or 9 seasons?
Well, you know what? It's hard to
finish. Go ahead.
I just want to say it's hard to overstate the success of The Office. It's probably one of the most successful TV shows of all time. I mean,
And even though it's off the air, I was going to say, people are watching it, writing articles on it. I forgot how much money Netflix had to pay just to keep it on for a year. But now NBC's Peacock is going to have it. And you see articles about Netflix losing The Office this year.
Well,
it's like a national tragedy.
It was widely reported as the most watched show on Netflix, like by a huge margin.
Yeah.
I don't know what the numbers are now, but that was true like a few years back.
So Reno 911 comes on the air roughly around the same time as The Office. Also, I guess, uses a mockumentary format.
It's a satire of cops, really.
Okay, and like The Office, it's an ensemble show. But tell us more.
Yeah, I mean, well, Reno 911, it's a satire of cops. It takes place in whatever setting, the settings
Nevada.
are like, yeah, but the settings are like the police station, making an arrest on the street, the briefing room at the police station, just typical like locations you see in like the TV show Cops. And they come up with comedy out of that, the characters are all very well defined. I mean, this is something you see in a lot of improv, right? So in a lot of improv, you're trying to really define your character, right? You're trying to nail it down. And so in Reno 911, the cops are they're very wacky, very wacky characters, very unusual characters. Like I think the head of the department, he's gay, right?
Yeah.
Or he's in the closet, I think. But he's flamboyantly gay, and it almost gets to the line of being homophobic, but I wouldn't say it does. But it's
well,
very.
I mean, to me, the Thomas Lennon stuff that has not aged well. In my
you don't think so?
I no. Oh hell no. It's. But then there's like a really great scene where, because I watched it last night. I don't remember what season it is, where they're doing a prostitute sting, and he's hired two women to make love to each other. And he's like, wait, stop. I don't buy this. I am going to pay for this. I mean, I don't buy the scene. And he literally like coaches them through the scene, like how to do a better performance. And that is really something where you do really, I don't know how much, that's what I'm talking about.
That's a typical improv thing. That's going off on a total tangent.
On a total tangent. You don't see it coming. True, he's actually telling people what to do, which you normally wouldn't do in an improv, but it's still so out of the blue, and the other actors really commit to it, and all of a sudden the prostitutes are just like acting students, and he's like an acting coach, and the whole scene, and then finally the button is, as soon as they get the scene right, the other cops who've been hiding behind come and applaud them before they bust them.
That sounds really funny. I haven't seen it.
It's really not only that, but given the nature of Reno 911, which is even more nonlinear, I would argue, than The Office, that's all that scene ever has to be. Like it's not like that scene has to have any kind of consequence. That's not an A story, obviously. It could be a B. Oh, sorry. So in sitcoms, I really should have put this down. You have a A story and a B story, and you might have a runner. And the majority of your time on a scripted show is the main story. And then the secondary story is kind of used to give you some space so that things can move along in the A story, but you don't have to give all of your focus to it. And then the runner is just little bits, stage bits that may appear 1, 2, or 3 times just for a moment on the show. Because almost all the shows we're talking about that have improv in them are ensemble shows on some level. All of these shows will have an A, B, and a runner. And what's interesting about the mockumentary style of Reno 911 for me is because it's even more like cinema verite. Because Cops is just the day in the life of a cop.
Yeah, Cops is cinema verite, and
which is a fancy word. Which is a fancy word to say you just let the camera. Please, film school man, explain cinema verite.
Well, cinema verite is just I think it's French for true cinema, true movie. But anyway,
Movie.
it's just a fancy word for documentary. It's a documentary. It's like.
But the camera's passive.
Yeah, the camera's passive. I mean, the idea is the camera is like a fly on the wall. The people in front of the camera are ignoring it. They don't. Yeah. So this is what you would see if there were no camera. Is the idea.
So unlike The Office, where mockumentary has a goal, we're gonna find out what life is like in the office, and we're gonna really probe these people to validate our thesis. Reno, just like Cops, just kind of lets the camera assume a neutral position, and then if something happens, it may have a consequence that takes you through the episode, or it just may exist only for that moment.
And Reno 911, I don't think it's not as successful a show as the other two shows we're talking about, but it is definitely like one of the best examples of effective use of improv in TV ever, right? I mean, I don't know.
Oh yeah, they even used improv on the audition process. So there's an interview they talk about on Michael Peele. It was either Jordan Peele or Michael. I think it's Jordan Peele. So Jordan Peele auditions for an episode, and when you audition for the episode, two of the actors from the show will do an improv scene with you, and that's part of the audition process.
The show's all improv. I mean, it's like
right, so from it's Michael Key. Anyway, my point is, they end up doing this scene that deals with what's called a hypothetical criminal, a man who thinks about committing hypothetical crime, and from that audition scene, they build an entire episode. So, and you're the one who tells me that they do the briefing scene in the morning, and they just go out and film everything for 10 hours, or how did they do that?
There's a morning briefing thing they do, and they just shoot it for like 10 hours and then cut it down to whatever they use on the show, which is like maybe an hour of it.
So they'll just literally run out the camera. They'll throw them into space. Like
so that's this is what I was talking about, the technology. Technology allows them to just keep rolling and rolling and rolling. Multiple cameras. It's like digital cameras. Like the media is free almost, right? I mean, you can just keep recording forever. I mean, in film days, like I said, 15 minutes, and that costs like $20,000 at 15 minutes.
No, but you're right. The camera rolls through and they just pick up. Like, all right, so audience member, a little confession. Back in, was it 2004?
I don't know. Oh.
Well, a long time ago,
okay.
You and I, we decided we wanted to do we live here in Los Angeles, and we wanted to do a show where we went to different parts of neighborhoods of LA, and we would explore it. And it was called Let's Do LA with Chris and Randall.
I think it was Chris and Randall Do LA, I thought. No.
I think I thought it was Let's Do LA with Chris and Randall, or it could have been Chris and Randall Do LA. I have it somewhere. And we would go to different neighborhoods like Venice Beach or Hollywood. And we'd have a director named Brandon Burkhart, who was a very successful writer and also storyteller. If you ever see his name on something, please watch it. He is very talented. He was our director. And he would give us, he'd film us and direct us. And we would look at something in the locale, and we would build a scene off of what was there. And I will tell you, I still remember how incredibly difficult it was to it sounds easy. Like, we went to Muscle Beach, and, I was not in great shape even then, and have me in a bathing suit standing next to bodybuilders. And that was pretty easy. But then all of a sudden it's like, yeah, but what's the rest of the day going to be like? And so Randall, you and I, we would have our takes, and then Brandon would take us through takes. And if you have faith in the process and you're open to whatever was around you at the time, didn't you find that you would just, the process would take care of itself?
Yeah, I mean, the digital technology, you just keep rolling and rolling, and you have, 3-4 hours of raw footage.
Right.
And then you cut it down to like 22 minutes.
But I think on both occasions, we just worked until the battery ran out.
Yeah, we worked a long time. We worked all day, I think, for like one episode.
We worked all day. Yeah, for one episode. Yeah, if Hollywood, we didn't know what we were doing. So I think we only taped like 2.5 hours. And then the second episode was Venice Beach, where we had enough to do 6 hours, right? It was freaking painful, and there were other people doing the exact same thing. But, like we would interview a street vendor who did their own art. Or I remember at the time there was a volleyball court on the beach, but there was nobody to play volleyball.
Yeah.
But we didn't have a ball. So we just played invisible volleyball, and you'd be on one side and I'd be on the other side.
I think that was your idea. You just said, let's put the ball in later and post production.
We'll figure it out. We don't really know what it is.
It was funny.
We cut it off so it was so fast and sped up the film. I remember this.
Right.
And then we scored it to music, so it looked even better. And it was ridiculous. But my point is, when you're working as an actor or a writer or a team on a script, you've got a blueprint. So you have a set amount of time. And in fairness, television normally works where they only have so much time to film stuff. They only have so much time to write stuff. Everything is there's just not a lot of freedom and time. So even I now know, I have a lot of respect for the people who do like a show like Reno 911, because they had much longer shoot days and a much longer creative period just to get a single 20-minute episode. It's much harder to put out a 20-minute episode of Reno 911. I would argue probably even harder than The Office, but certainly harder than a regular scripted show. Cool thing about Reno 911 is it spawned a movie. Mm-hmm. And Quibi, do you know that Quibi channel?
Yeah, Quibi.
They're bringing Quibi. Reno 911 has a new season coming out later this year, or is already out, depending on when you're watching this, on Quibi. So it's unlike The Office. It's still an ongoing thing.
Yeah, I mean, Reno 911, I think, really proved that an improv show could be viable and fun. And yeah, I mean, it's like, I think they made it up to 88 episodes, and 100 is like what you want for syndication. And
right, and that's kind of almost exactly where The Office is over 100. But they're both. Now, the thing about The Office and the thing about Reno 911 is they're mockumentary shows, which, as I say, I think makes it much easier. It's a compelling format for improv, because even if you look at it, reality television is by nature almost improvisational, because you're just capturing what's there. But the show that I really feel has utilized it, I honestly think it's the best example of it. Every year it gets nominated not only for best comedy at the Emmys, it also, even this year, gets nominated for, get this, best script, which is an oxymoron for a show that claims to use improv. And it's also now it's been on for 3 decades. It started out in 1999 and it's now 2020. So it's over 20 years. And that is Curb Your Enthusiasm.
Right. Well, let me just say a couple things about it. Yeah. So Curb Your Enthusiasm is plotted, right? They have the beats down. Larry David and whatever writer's working on it, they know where the show's going,
Well, I'll do you one better. I'm going to read to you the interview. It says, because it's just a short paragraph, but they were interviewed in an article in Variety in 2017, and it says, Curb uses no script. Instead, the actors improvise their dialogue based on a bare outline. 2 opposing cameras simultaneously record the action, and then in post, the editors must comb through all the footage to find the beats of an episode that can take up 3 weeks to finish. Creator Larry David and series director Jeff Schaffer are both heavily involved.
I just want to say, before Curb even came out, I think I used to do sketches with Brandon Burkhart. Speak of Brandon Burkhart, I used to do sketches with Brandon.
This is your show.
We would outline sketches. We'd outline a sketch idea, and then we wouldn't write dialogue, and we would just improv the sketch when we got on stage, and it worked great. And the funny thing is, though, I tried it with other actors, and not all actors can do that. Some actors really want lines,
Some do, and I remember I used to go to the Groundlings Cooking with Gas, and you'd see like really talented actors do improv, or really talented stand-ups, and they would suck it. I'll just say it. I saw Hilary Swank, Academy Award-winning actress, do improv, and she was lost in the woods. I saw Dave Cross, one of the funniest comics I know, just not be able to work with an improv. Look, I'm not saying they got better. It was 20 years ago, but it one isn't natural to the other. But the format that you see that Larry David uses is not that dissimilar to the format that Woody Allen uses or the British filmmakers Ken Loach or Mike Leigh use, which is they know roughly what they want to achieve, but they're trusting the actors to find it.
Well, it's different in that I think that those filmmakers, they do most of their improv in rehearsal. And they do scenes
but they also film scenes too. They're completely improvised. They both in the rehearsal and while the cameras are running.
Okay.
They will do that.
But I think Larry David it's mostly improv going on in there, I think.
Well, they're both in other words, he's borrowing techniques that were honed by those filmmakers, is all I'm saying. He didn't just make it up himself, which doesn't take away anything from the genius of it. He's the first one to really, he may not even be the first one to successfully apply to TV, but it's certainly fascinating to see this approach because it's so different than The Office and Reno 911.
Well, one of the things you have to do when you have a format like Larry David's on Curb Your Enthusiasm is you do have to have a very well done plot. The beats, the outline he's talking about, that has to be ironclad. It has to make sense. The actors have to be able to look at it and understand it and understand everything in the outline. Some of the best improv I've seen, actually, because I've worked on various different projects, and some of the best improv I've seen come from actors is when they have had a full script, right? Yeah. And you go to the set and they don't even deliver any of their lines right from the script, right? But they're better than the script because the script has given them the signposts. It's given them the direction.
There are these famous things you can Google called great scenes from film history where the actor completely made up their own dialogue, and it's freaking brilliant.
Right, but and they can do that though because they did have the script to work from, right? And they have to also have scene partners, their co-workers, their other actors who can go along with it and go along with the improv. I mean, if you have an actor that is completely welded to the script, and their partner goes off and they get lost, I mean, that's a problem, right? So a show like Curb, every actor on that show has a strong improv background, I think. I mean, I don't know.
No, actually, it's a bit weird because Curb is a mixture of three types of actors, or four. Curb has improv people like Cheryl Hines, who used to teach improv at the Groundlings, and then it has stand-ups like Jeff Garlin, Richard Lewis, and they're just very good at being fast on their feet. And then it has comedic actors who, like the late Super Dave Osborne, who are good at playing funny people. And then occasionally we'll just have real people, playing a variation of themselves, like Ted Danson. Ted Danson is a very talented actor who has spent almost 50 years in television, and simultaneously, actually he and Jeff Garlin are both simultaneously on Curb while they're also on scripted shows. Whereas Jeff Garlin plays a character named Jeff Green, who is, I would imagine, very different than the real Jeff Garlin. Ted Danson is playing a variation of Ted Danson. And what's my point? My point is that I saw an interview. Go ahead.
Well, Ted Danson, he's improvising on the show. I mean, he doesn't have lines like everybody else.
But I'm saying that it all comes naturally to them because if you look it up on Google, the Paley Fest, 10 years ago, they asked Larry David about why improv. And it's really interesting because it almost echoes when they built Seinfeld, they got all these great actors because Jerry Seinfeld didn't feel comfortable acting. And the reason why George Costanza almost always got the girl and not Jerry is he didn't even feel comfortable doing love scenes. He just knew how to be a stand-up. And Larry David has always thought of himself really as a writer, and he doesn't know anything about acting, and he doesn't want to remember lines, and he's not comfortable with lines. So the whole structure of the improvisational technique of Curb Your Enthusiasm was to allow Larry David to feel comfortable enough to do a show where he plays a variation of Larry David. And by the way, I've rarely ever, it's not until I think I saw a Woody Allen movie about 10 years ago where Larry David plays somebody who's not Larry David. And it's basically just Larry David playing Woody Allen. In fact, honestly, until he started doing Bernie Sanders, which is also a variation of Larry David, Larry David is not a guy who can play anything but Larry David, or at least that's what he's comfortable doing. So the entire structure of the show is built around what will serve Larry David best.
Okay.
And weirdly enough, that works great.
Yeah. Well, let me just say that. Well, you know, he's a character, and he knows his character well. I just want to say on the technological side. Yeah, I read an interview with the cinematographer of this show, and he said that when they first started, they would try to roll 3 cameras constantly, but he realized that he only needed 2. He needed one on Larry David and one on whoever Larry David was talking to. It could be like one person, it could be 3 people, but you just needed one other camera on them to get the reversal. And that was it. And they just, when they do a scene, they just roll and and they get it, you know?
And it gives that show like Reno and The Office, because The Office was always known for people going this to the camera, you know, and Reno has the framing that you see from Cops. And so much, there are very few scenes on, there's some, but very few scenes on Curb that don't involve Larry in the scene. He's normally in almost every scene of any show, with a few exceptions where someone is doing something behind Larry's back that will affect Larry down the line.
You know, I think that probably really helps.
Like Leon. Leon is always up to no good behind Larry's back.
Right. I think that probably really helps the show because, you know, Larry David's like basically the head writer of the show. He's always there. He's guiding the scenes. You know, he has if a scene goes too far off, you know, the outline, he can bring it back. I mean, I guess there's a lot of reasons why we don't see more improv and more TV shows. I guess, you know, it's just, it does take a little bit more time.
Yeah.
Right. It does take a little more time.
And time is money.
Yes. Time is money. The producers of these shows probably want to exert more control. I mean, the idea of just telling the crew, hey, go out and get gold, right? Go out and improv some gold. You know, I'm sure that a lot of producers in Hollywood would not want to. Yeah. that would make their stomach sink all the way to the ground, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it certainly makes The Office impressive that they had to deal with network issues, standards and practices, and a lot of stuff. Whereas I would argue Reno might have had some of that to deal with. And clearly Curb has had none of that to deal with. Pretty much, they took 8 years off on Curb.
Oh, yeah. Well, you know, the way these shows work, I think, is they're cheap, right? I mean, I think all these shows are very inexpensive. Curb is very inexpensive.
I don't think they're cheap because, honestly, the stuff that is plotted in the seasonal arcs of Curb get more and more elaborate. I mean, you know, putting on a production, getting Lin-Manuel Miranda to do a musical version of the Devil's or the Salman Rushdie novel. You know, it was very elaborate. Or bringing back the cast of Seinfeld is very elaborate. And they are very elaborate episodes of The Office. I do think Reno's a cheap show, but I think the other two shows throw money. They have, look, HBO and NBC does not mind writing $1 million checks.
Yeah, but
$2 million checks. They're not cheap shows.
That a show like Curb is like a fraction of the cost of like Game of Thrones, right?
But for a comedy, it's one of the more expensive comedies because comedies are cheaper. But Curb is not a cheap show to put together because a script allows you to do cost cutting. Improv, it does not. It does not allow you to do cost cutting. So the only benefit that I can really see that Larry David has on Curb is the same benefit someone like a Woody Allen has, which is he can get actors to do stuff that they might charge a premium for less money because they get the pleasure of working with Larry David. But I would say on The Office, they paid Kathy Bates good money to appear on The Office.
You know, I don't know. It's an interesting question for me, but I would say The Office was probably a less expensive show. I think that,
look it up, man. You'll see it was not cheap. Big. In fact, that's kind of why it went off the air. Is it just became too damn expensive?
no, it could be. It could be. It's just I would imagine just the one set of. I know Scrubs had a certain degree of improv. That was another show where like it all took place on one set. You know, one place.
Yeah, but The Office doesn't take place in one set. They go further and further out in the world, which is also true for Curb. Hell, they went to New York for an entire season of Curb. But the overall point, as we draw to the end of our episode, is I don't think, Randall, that improvised storytelling is going to ever be the dominant form of sitcoms, but it certainly seems to dominate. Once it finds its footing, all three of these shows are really long running, still have a long following today. Two of these three shows are still on the air almost 20 years later, and the other one that isn't on the air is still being watched as if it was a brand new show. And I want to ask you, the last question is, why do you think these particular non-scripted, non-traditional improv-based shows have had such a following, such a dedicated following, and have made such a long and lasting impact that even watching old episodes of Reno, The Office, and Curb, even if they are a little dated, they still seem far more timeless than even some of our best scripted comedies?
Well, I mean, I think the main reason is that the looser format, the improv format, it allows the actor to bring more of a contribution to the show, to their character, and I think that's important. I mean, there is an attitude in certain parts of the industry, right, that the actors are just interchangeable. They're just in to do a job, whatever it is. I mean, you don't like the actor, you just replace them, right? But actors really bring a lot to their characters, you know, and these improv formats really show that that the actor, you know, you let the actor contribute, and they can make it better.
You know, that's a great point. You're always thinking that, you know, theater is always called a writer's medium, and film is always called a director's medium. But it's quite possible that television is an actor's medium. It's where we come every week to see the same performer interpret the same role in an interesting way that's still engaging. And I guess because in an improvised scripted show, the actor has far more leeway to take chances, make risks, and find new things every week or every episode. These shows are always weekly. We come back to see what they're going to come up with next.
Right. Well, let me just say that, I mean, there's a reason why the top paid people in entertainment are actors. You know, I mean, actors are extremely important. There is, I mean, I know that there's this perception, I used to have it, that actors weren't that important to a project, but actors are probably the most important part of the project. Okay. Casting is probably the most important part. Okay. Because that person is going to be in front of the camera the whole time. You know, that person is going to be interpreting the entire project to the viewer the whole time. They are an essential part of the whole process. You know, you replace Tom Cruise, you know, with anybody else, you get a totally different movie. I mean, that's just how it is.
Well, that is certainly a really good topic for another episode, but it does put a lovely button on this one, which is that the naturalistic qualities, the ensemble qualities, the spontaneous nature, the feeling that there's something that reflects the way we really think and feel. There are so many different elements that make the improvisational techniques in comedy work. And because it does come out of acting, it really does come down to the strength of the actors, plural, and their ability to work with each other and their script and their setting. That makes this a special thing. Well, thank you, everybody. It was a great conversation, wasn't it, Randall? You had a good time?
This was a good show.
It was a good show. Yes, and not only that, but we'll probably do other shows where we address improv in the future. Well, you ready for some more zinc pizza, or do you want some tungsten pizza? I asked a question.
I'm working on gold pizza, Chris. I'm working on gold pizza. I'm going
pizza?
up.
Well, you know, then we're going to get really fat on metallic pizza after this show. I'm Chris.
I'm Randall.
Thank you for listening and watching. We'll talk again. Bye.
Bye.